told that Sinn Féin Labour Party once nominated Councillor Robin Wood to be Mayor of Derby. So, please be seated. Welcome back, everybody, and those of you who are with us for lunch, and those who were watching online. We'll now conduct the second part of our annual general meeting, which starts again with apologies. Are there any apologies, Councillor Lind? No? Any others? We're all here, that's great. Are there any declarations of interest? No, thank you. The minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of February 2021. Will somebody please move? Councillor Poulter, seconded. Councillor Holmes, thank you. Anybody want to speak on that? Thank you. Announcements from the Mayor. Firstly, I'd like to thank councillors for my election earlier today. It's a tremendous privilege to be elected as Mayor of the City of Derby, and I look forward to working with you all over the course of the next year. I intend to conduct these meetings with appropriate impartiality and wholly in accordance with council procedure rules. And I've got Emily beside me to make sure that happens. I hope we can enjoy honest and robust debate over the course of the next year, whilst ensuring we always remain respectful of others. I'd also like to congratulate the newly elected and returning councillors following the local elections in May. Please forgive me if I get your names wrong. I'll soon get them sorted, and I think I've met most of you up to now. Anybody I haven't met, please come and bump my elbow or whatever we're doing at the moment, high fives or something. I hope you enjoy the next 4 years and you'll be able to achieve the goals you have set on behalf of your constituents. Finally, I'd like to thank the returning officer and her team for organising a successful set of polls in incredibly challenging circumstances. Thank you, Emily. Next, to address some housekeeping matters, councillors will note there's updated versions of items 14, 15 and 16 were circulated after the publication of the agenda. These are the appointments to constitutional committees, outside bodies and neighbourhood boards. I also understand that there was a typographical error in the schedule of meetings relating to the date of March 2022, the meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee, which has now been corrected. I expect that several votes are likely to be required on appointments. Please be patient as we go through this process and be sure that you indicate your preference clearly. That's a matter of putting your hand right up today, because it's not going to be quite easy for people to count the votes, and it might be extremely important to see the exact numbers. So you indicate your preference clearly to allow that you can be seen in this large meeting room. Fellow councillors, I'm saddened to report the passing of two former councillors, Vic Gray and Patrick Fullerton. I'm probably the only person in the room that knew them both. Actually, no, Roy, I recognise that you knew them both. I probably was the only one that was actually a councillor with them both, put it that way. Right, they both worked for Rolls-Royce. They were both members of this council, and they were both completely eccentric in their own way. I don't think it's disrespectful to say that, because I think that was part of the merits of both of them. Vic Gray was councillor for Chellaston before Chellaston was actually in Derby. So he was a councillor on South East Derbyshire Rural District Council. In 1968, when that came into the borough, as it then was, the county borough, he took the same seat in Chellaston on the Derby Council, and where he was councillor from 1968 to 1974. He then, like a lot of councillors, went to the county council when the powers went to Matlock, and represented Babington Ward in Derby at Matlock from 1974 to 1981. And believe it or not, he was then my county councillor, because although I haven't moved, I've lived in 3 different wards without moving. And then in 1981, he became Allestree County Councillor until 1985, when he moved to Canterbury and gave up his seat. And there was a young whippersnapper of a chap with a rather dodgy moustache that took on being Allestree County Councillor. I think his name was something like Roy Webb. There we go. Patrick Fullerton was a barrister, a really brilliant brain. And goodness, brains on a council like this aren't that common. He was like his, I'm saying. He was completely eccentric as well. He was often being ribbed by members of other parties, because he would stand in council and look up at something way up there, and other councillors would all go like that to see what he was looking at. But that was just his way of doing things. He was the one and only Conservative councillor for Alveston, as far as I can remember. Alveston Ward had different boundaries in those days, and he was councillor for Alveston from 1988 to 1995. All that time when Conservatives had a majority, so his vote really counted for that. He was born in Folkestone and spoke English a bit of the way I do. He was a brilliant mind. He got 12 O-levels, which even in my day, and he was 2 years younger than me, was unheard of, and it included astronomy. And then went on to do a degree in economics, but become a lawyer and eventually a barrister, working for Rolls-Royce and fighting court battles for Rolls-Royce. The fortune of some councillors goes up and down. What we all dream of happened to him. A distant cousin in Australia, who he'd never heard of, died and left him a small fortune, which meant he could leave Rolls-Royce, buy a house in Keats Avenue, which is the best bit of Littleover, I think, and set up in practice on his own, which was wonderful until the 2008 crash, when his firm collapsed with everything else. He became such that he was made bankrupt. He had to sell his house in Keats Avenue and lived in rental accommodation until he died just recently. He, as I say, he was a councillor for Alveston, and in those days Alveston had 2 members, and weirdly it had a Labour member and a Conservative member, and even more weirdly, they were the best of friends. Chris Wynne and Patrick Fullerton were great mates. They did everything together. Chris was even his best man at Patrick's wedding, and is now an executor of Patrick's will, which is how I got to receive Patrick's diary. In the days before we had internet and all these bits of wire all over the place, we had a diary that had all the dates of meetings in and everything like that. And the fascinating thing about this is that he's marked all the target wards for the next election, because he had one of those brains that could work out exactly what the election results would be before the election took place. He knew his own majority, and he knew when he was going to get voted out. Now, couldn't we all do with people like that now? But that's my contribution to their memory. 2 excellent councillors that we will one day, somebody will read out something like that about us. But there we go. Has anybody else got anything they would like to add to that about either of them? In which case, thank you. I probably always get asked to do these bits. I've never done it from this chair before. As I say, one day you'll have to do it about me. Right, the next item then. Well, actually, when we do that, we normally have a minute's silence, don't we? And I think for 2 notable councillors like that, this is such an occasion. So may I ask you to stand for a minute's silence? Thank you. Item 11 is a minute extract from a meeting of the Audit and Accounts Committee held on the 4th of November 2020. I understand the minute is recommending an alteration to the terms of reference for the committee and henceforth be known as the Audit and Governance Committee to better reflect its overall remit. Councillor Willoughby, as the chair of that committee throughout the last municipal year, would you move the minute, please?
Yes, Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to move it as printed, please. Thank you.
Okay. Is there a seconder? Thank you. Councillor West, thank you. Those in favour, please show. Any against? That's carried. Thank you. Shortly be asking for nominations to any unfilled positions and conduct a vote of any positions. Have I missed an awful lot out? Yes, I probably have. Two sides of the page. Got a beautifully written script here. We now move to the announcement of the Council Cabinet. Councillor Poulter was elected to a 4-year term as leader of the Council in May 2018. I will move the motion as printed to receive the announcement. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Holmes. And any other nominations from that at this point? Thank you. Can I put that to the vote then, the motion as printed? Those in favour? Thank you. Any against? Thank you. And I believe at this point, Councillor Poulter, you make an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm delighted to make the announcements in respect of the Cabinet members for the next 12 months. You'll be hearing that you're introducing two new members, some new fresh blood into the Cabinet. But just a reflection on other things that are happening across the council. Firstly, is that I was hoping to be equally delighted that we might have made progress in some common sense way forward in relation to the allocation of chairs and vice chairs, to the extent that we met with the leader of the Labour group in respect of their proposal and motion in respect of the way to sort out chairs and vice chairs. We went through the protocols, we understood what each other would have got under that protocol, and we've been nominating to them. It's just a disappointment to me that to not be able to go along with the positivity with the Cabinet, that the leader of the Labour group's not able to take his group along with him, shall we say, and agree to the common sense, fair, transparent and open way in which to do this process. But we'll see that will emerge as the afternoon goes on. But I'm going to go away from that negative and stick to the positives of announcing my Cabinet. And the first one is, of course, my deputy leader here, my left-hand man on this occasion, who is also Cabinet member for planning, regeneration and strategic transport. And I thank Matt for the last few years in that role, and Matt will continue in that role to deliver what we're planning to do for the recovery of the city. My second announcement is in relation to the Cabinet member for governance, legal, HR and other things he doesn't know about yet. Councillor Barker, my right hand man in this occasion, always there, always dependable, always knows his facts. And there's nobody in this council that knows more about the governance of the council from a membership point of view. And we're able to keep a close rein on that as a result. So again, thank you for your service so far, Mick. The third one is in relation to a stalwart, probably, I think, Mr. Mayor, you may be father of the house, but Roy Webb's not far behind you. But what I do know is that Roy Webb, in terms of being the Cabinet member for adult health and housing, is the one person in the council that knows most about that subject as a member and is the most appropriate member to do that role, in which he has agreed to continue. The same applies actually to the Cabinet member for children and young people, which has been held by my colleague Yvonne Williams, who again is the expert in terms of members on this council in relation to that portfolio, a portfolio which she dedicates herself to fully understands, carries out in an appropriate way with excellent relations with officers in a bid to, in this case, repair a couple of our schools, but to absolutely champion education throughout the city, champion our children in care, and champion the lives, the support for the lives of children throughout the city. So she will continue in that role with my big sincere thanks for doing that for the last few years. So we turn then to the Cabinet Member for Finance and Procurement and Internal Audit, and whatever she thinks she wants to get her teeth into is Councillor Ralston, who I know quite well, but has equally managed the role in a fantastic way, working exceptionally well with the officers to produce balanced budgets in the last 3 years whilst being in control. And in this particular year, after the outturn on the year, turning a potential deficit and use of reserves of around 5 million into a profit, if you like. So there's a substantial underspend in the financial budget, for which officers and Councillor Ralston should be congratulated, and again will help us to take the council forward in that regard. So Councillor Ralston will continue in that role. So now we turn to the Cabinet Member for Leisure and Culture. Your role, as was for the last 2 years, Robin, and I thank you for your efforts in that role. I think we've talked about this before, but it re-stimulated your juices in relation to running, being involved in the running the council, and it was a perfect fit for you. And had you not been elected as mayor this year, which is entirely the right thing, you would have continued in that role. I have to say, to congratulate you in your appointment as mayor. In line with other things I've talked about with other cabinet members, you're the perfect man for the role in this case. The mayoralty has suffered in the last 2 years for a variety of reasons, not least COVID, but other things have been had an effect on the value of the mayoralty of the city. It needs rebuilding, and you are the right man to be able to rebuild the city in that regard, and you'll be ably supported by Councillor Grimmadell, who on his return has become the deputy mayor, and I congratulate him on that. But that all means, of course, that you need to be replaced as cabinet member for a full title being leisure, culture and tourism. And the proposal is, what I'm intending to do is to welcome a new cabinet member to the role, a member who's been with the council and with this group for a considerable while now, that learnt the ropes and has always expressed an interest and shown vigour in supporting regeneration in the city. The role that you've left is deeply involved in regeneration through the swimming pool, Beckett Well, the marketplace, the Silk Mill, and all regeneration that goes towards our regeneration of the city and reactivating the city. That member I'm going to appoint is Councillor Ross McChrystal. Welcome to the cabinet, Ross. I'm sure you'll enjoy and make a massive contribution to our efforts in the next 12 months, and we'll go from there. So the other change in relation to the cabinet proposals is that I'm going to split the role of cabinet member for Street Pride into a single portfolio, because I think there's a need to focus somebody to focus on front-facing services for the public. So your dog poo, your dustbins, your potholes, everything that the council and that the public expect and deliver us to deliver as a result of them paying their council tax. And that was always a lot for any one portfolio to manage alongside communities in place. So I'm making a new appointment to that role in Street Pride, and that's going to be my colleague from Chaddisden, Jerry Pearce, who's agreed to take up the role, and that will absolutely be a great follow-on from Jonathan, who's made that his own for a few years, but he needs to focus on the role that I'm going to talk about, the new role for him that I'm going to talk about in a minute. So welcome, Jerry. Again, I'm sure you'll make a great contribution to Cabinet and help us in our delivery of our plan for the city. Yeah. So turn then to the last post then, which is now, it's still going to, I'm going to name it Communities in Place. It was, I considered, and we talked about the title being something to do with recovery of communities and rebuilding of place, that sort of thing. I'm going to stick with Communities in Place because to talk about rebuilding or and whatever is a bit negative. So we're not going to be that. Jonathan Smale will be the Cabinet member for Communities Place, and he will, we've talked already about what the brief will be, but it's going to be in support of Communities in Place, would you believe? And that's the city centre community, which needs massive rejuvenation. He'll work with all our partners across the city, from community action, build on the benefits we got out of COVID with our community partners. We've got the police force, the police returning to Fall Street Police Station in the next few weeks with a new enforcement hub capacity. And there are organisations throughout the city centre all hell-bent on turning our city around, and Jonathan will be working with them alongside our communities in the neighbourhoods and running the neighbourhood agenda throughout our wards. So those, Mr Mayor, are the announcements in relation to Cabinet Place and their roles, and I am confident, more than confident, that we are the right people in the round pegs in the round holes to deal with taking our city forward and delivering on what you mentioned in your speech this morning and was able to save me from having to say. So thank you, Mr Mayor. Those are the announcements. Thank you, Cabinet members. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Poulter, and congratulations to all 9 Cabinet members, particularly to Ross, taking on my former portfolio. I think you'll have a great job, and it's a very interesting job, and you'll have a great team supporting you. Also, welcome Jerry, because I know you're more than capable of talking muck and dustbins. Thanks very much. Great. Let's move on. Item 13 is the schedule of meetings. Councillors have before them the schedule of meetings for the forthcoming year. Before I move these, are there any final amendments to them? Nobody? Okay. Can I move them as printed? Those in favour? Thank you. Any against? Great. They're taken then. Now move to the substantive. Whoops. I didn't ask for a mover and a seconder, but I got one. The mover was Councillor Barker, and the seconder was Councillor Poulter. Okay, thank you. But those are passed. Item 14 is the constitutional appointments. Councillors have before them the proposed appointments for the forthcoming year. I'll shortly be asking for nominations for any unfilled positions and conduct a vote for any positions where multiple nominations have been received, as indicated by the documents circulated in advance of the meeting. Once contested positions are resolved, I will then move the constitutional appointments, and we will vote on the document as a whole. The precedent set last year was to hand this over to Alex to do that, and I'm more than willing to let him handle it, because it can get quite complicated at some points. We even get to do what the Liberal Democrats have always wanted, and have a system of voting where people drop out and we move along a bit, which I can never get my head around. So Alex, over to you to conduct the election on that.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll run through the document initially to fill any remaining vacant positions, and then we'll return to any votes on positions where multiple nominations have been received. So the first position that has not been filled, there is an independent vacancy on the Corporate Services Scrutiny Review Board. Are there any independent councillors who'd like to put themselves forward for that position?
Can we get these sorted out after this meeting?
They need to be agreed at this meeting. Okay, so sorry, Councillor Ingle, just to confirm, that's the Corporate Services Scrutiny Review Board, the Regeneration and Housing Scrutiny Review Board, and I believe there is also a vacancy on the Corporate Parenting Committee. Would you like to take that one as well? Do the two. Any other nominations to the Corporate Parenting Committee, please? No? Okay, we'll leave that one as vacant. Okay, in which case we'll then return to, there are a couple of vice chair positions where no nominations have been received. Are there any nominations for the vice chair of the Regeneration and Housing Scrutiny Board, please? Just to remind councillors, the councillors who've been appointed or have been proposed for that board are Councillor Patterson, Councillor McChrystal, Councillor Grummerdale, Councillor West, Councillor Shiraz Khan, Councillor Evans, and now Councillor Ingle as well. Councillor Kerr.
It's just a matter of procedure. I think we ought to sort out the chair's position before we talk about vice chair on that.
Okay, we could return to that. That does make sense. Secondly, we would need a nomination is required for the vice chair position on the Adults and Health Scrutiny Board. There is only a single nomination to the chair's position on that one. So the remaining councillors on that board who have been put forward are Councillor Pegg, Councillor Cooper, Councillor Grummerdale, Councillor Hussain, Councillor Lonsdale and Councillor Froggatt. Are there any nominations to the vice chair position from those councillors?
If nobody else is willing to do it, I'm sure Councillor Lonsdale would.
Thank you, Ruth. Similarly, there is a vacancy. No nominations have been received for the vice chair of the Corporate Parenting Committee. Councillor Williams has been proposed as chair. The remaining councillors are Councillor Alison Holmes, Councillor Pandy, Councillor Hussain, Councillor Heselgrave, Councillor Lind and Councillor Cuss. Would any of those councillors like to be proposed as the vice chair of the Corporate Parenting Committee, please? Councillor Heselgrave. Apologies, there is one further independent vacancy on the Standards Committee as well. Were there any independent councillors who would like to be represented on the Standards Committee? No, okay, we'll leave that vacant. Okay, in which case we will return to the votes that are required. The first vote, I believe, Mr. Mayor, is for the Corporate Services Scrutiny Review Board. Nominations have been received for Councillor Nater and Councillor Cooper. So, Mr. Mayor, if you'd like to conduct the vote for that position, please, we will count up the results.
Do we have nominations?
Councillor Nater and Councillor Cooper with the nomination.
All right. Those in favour of Councillor Nater, please show. You got that? Thank you. And those in favour of Councillor Potter? Cooper. Cooper. Cooper.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Nater is the clear winner there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We now move on to the Regeneration and Housing Scrutiny Review Board. The two candidates are Councillor Patterson and Councillor Evans.
Those in favour of Councillor Patterson? Okay. Those in favour of Councillor Evans? Please show clearly.
Carried by Councillor
Councillor
Evans.
Evans, you are appointed, and that's carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now we then return to a nomination for the vice chair of that committee, the Regeneration and Housing Scrutiny Review Board. So the candidates are Councillor Patterson, Councillor McChrystal, Councillor Grimmerdale, Councillor West, Councillor Shiraz Khan and Councillor Ingle. Would anyone like to propose any of those councillors as the vice chair of that committee, please? Yep. Do you have a second? Second, please.
Any other nominations for that post?
Regeneration.
In which case, Councillor Ingle, you're appointed to that. Thank you.
Okay, the next vote that is required is on the Community Scrutiny Review Board. The two candidates are Councillor Jennings and Councillor Prosser.
Those in favour of Councillor Jennings? 21. Those in favour of Councillor Prosser? Councillor Prosser, you are appointed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moving on to the Planning Control Committee. The two candidates for the chair of the Planning Control Committee are Councillor Hassel and Councillor Shiraz Khan.
Those in favour of Councillor Hassel? 21. Those in favour of Councillor Khan? Councillor Khan, you are elected as Chairman of Planning Control Committee.
Mr. Mayor, we now move to the vice chair positions for the licensing committee. We have received 6 nominations for 4 positions. So with the agreement of the group leaders prior to the meeting, we've agreed that what we will do is a recorded vote. We'll run through the names of each councillor, and if each councillor could nominate their 4 preferences for the vice chair positions from the 6 candidates. So to remind councillors, the 6 candidates for the vice chair positions are Councillor Alison Holmes, Councillor Heselgrave, Councillor Hussain, Councillor Bettany, Councillor AJ Graves and Councillor Testro. So I will shortly run through each councillor's name alphabetically, and if you could please indicate up to 4 votes for those positions, please. Okay, my spreadsheet's now loaded. Councillor Attwell, please.
Councillor Hussain, Councillor Heselgrave, Councillor Bettany,
Thank you, Councillor Attwell. Councillor Barker, please.
Councillor Alison Holmes only.
Councillor Bettany, please.
Councillor Bettany, myself, Alan Gray Jr., Paul Heselgrave, and Councillor Hussain.
Thank you. Councillor Bonser, please.
Councillor Hussain, Councillor Heselgrave, Councillor Bettany and Councillor Graves.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr, please.
Councillors Hussain, Hazelgrave, Bettany and Graves Jr.
Thank you. Councillor Carr, please.
Councillor Hussain, Councillor Heselgrave, Councillor Bettany and Councillor Graves Jr.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper, please.
Councillor Alison Holmes.
Thank you. Councillor Dinser, please.
Councillor Hussain, Councillor Heselgrave, Councillor Bettany, Councillor Graves.
Thank you. Councillor Evans, please.
Councillors Bettany, Graves Jr, Hazelgrave and Hussain.
Thank you. Councillor Eyre, please.
Councillor Holmes.
Councillor Froggatt, please.
Councillor Hussain, Councillor Testro, Councillor Bettany and Councillor Graves Junior.
Thank you. Councillor Graves Junior, please.
Hazelgrave, Hussain, Graves Junior, Bettany.
Thank you. Councillor Graves Senior, please.
Bettany, Graves, Hussain, Hazelgrave.
Councillor Grimmerdale, please. Councillor Hassel, please. Councillor Hazelgrave. Thank you. Councillor Alison Holmes. Councillor Matthew Holmes. Councillor Hussain. Thank you. Councillor Ingle, please.
Councillor Testro only.
Thank you. Councillor Jennings, please. Thank you. Councillor Jangir Khan. Thank you. Councillor Shiraz Khan.
Councillor Hussain, Hazelgrave, Bettany, Graves Junior.
Thank you. Councillor Cuss.
Councillors Hazelgrave, Hussain, Bettany and Graves.
Thank you. Councillor Lind.
Councillor Hussain, Councillor Hazelgrave, Councillor Bettany, Councillor Graves Junior.
Thank you. Councillor Lonsdale.
Councillor Hussain, Councillor Hazelgrave, Councillor Bettany and Councillor Graves, please.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Councillors Bettany, Hazelgrave, Hussain and Graves Junior.
Thank you. Councillor McChrystal.
Councillor A. Holmes.
Thank you. Councillor Nater.
Councillor Graves Junior, Bettany, Hazelgrave and Hussain.
Thank you. Councillor Nawaz.
Councillor Hussain, Councillor Hazelgrave, Councillor Bettany, Councillor Graves Junior.
Councillor Pandy, please. Councillor Pattison. Councillor J. Pearce. Councillor T. Pearce. Councillor Peatfield.
Councillor Hazelgrave, Hussain, Bettany and AJ Graves.
Thank you. Councillor Pegg, please. Councillor Potter. Councillor Poulter. Councillor Prosser, please.
Hazelgrave, Hussain, Bettany and Graves.
Councillor Repton, please.
Councillor Hussain, Hazelgrave, Bettany and Graves Junior.
Councillor Ralston, please. Thank you. Councillor Sandhu, please. Councillor Shanker, please.
Councillors Hussain, Hazelgrave, Bettany and Graves Junior.
Thank you. Councillor Skelton, please.
Councillor Hussain, Councillor Hazelgrave, Councillor Bettany and Councillor Graves Junior.
Thank you. Councillor Smale, please. Councillor Testro, please.
Yeah, I'll vote for myself and abstain the rest.
Thank you. Councillor Webb, please.
Councillor Alison Holmes only.
Thank you. Councillor West, please. Thank you. Councillor Williams, please.
Councillor Alison Holmes, please.
Thank you. Councillor Willoughby, please.
Councillor Hussain, Councillor Hazelgrave, Councillor Bettany and Councillor Graves Junior, please.
Thank you very much. And finally, Councillor Wood, the Mayor.
Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The four candidates with the most votes are Councillors Hazelgrave, Hussain, Bettany and AJ Graves. Councillor Froggatt, could you just confirm your vote again, please?
Councillor Hussain, Councillor Testro, Councillor Bettany and Graves Junior.
Thank you. If you bear with me one moment, please, Mr. Mayor, while I move back to the document I was working on previously. The next vote that is required are for nominations to the Police and Crime Panel. 2 nominations have been received from Councillor Potter and for Councillor Dinser, please.
Those in favour of Councillor Potter? 21. Those in favour of Councillor Dinser?
Please, rounds up, please, for Councillor Potter, please.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Can we count them?
22, 23, 24, 25. 25.
Thank you. And Councillor Dinser?
1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 9.
So, Councillor Potter is appointed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The final vote that was required on this document is related to the anti-fraud champion. We've received nominations for Councillor West and Councillor Potter.
Anti-fraud, those in favour of Councillor West? You got it?
So, did someone just put, did you have your hands up before, Graves Junior? Can you everyone put their hands up again, please? 1, 2, 3, 4.
And for Councillor Potter? 25. 21. Yeah, so that's Councillor West. Councillor West, you're appointed.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That concludes the voting on this document, so you may now move the substantive document.
Councillor West. I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the last sentence. Please do. Yeah, so you're nominating yourself for a post.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to second that, please.
Is that you nominating the creation of the post?
Yes, and nominating Councillor West to fulfil that post.
We have first to determine whether this is a matter of urgency. That is a decision I make as your mayor. I can see the point of such a post. What I don't see is why it is urgent. I will invite you to justify why this is a matter of such urgency that it needs to come up under CP 42.
Importance of culture in the city and how essential cultural venues will be in returning residents to the city centre. In a month where cultural venues have finally reopened after the last of 6 months, in a month where the long-awaited Museum of Making has finally opened to the public, ahead of the Ram Trail, the Book Festival, to name a few, I feel it important for Derby City Council to appoint a cultural champion today rather than wait until later this year, potentially July, for the next meeting.
I don't feel that that is a matter of such urgency, especially as we have a cabinet member for culture, leisure and tourism who is today taking on that portfolio. So I find that that is not a matter that is so urgent that needs to be discussed today. And I invite you to bring it forward as a notice of motion to a future council meeting. Thank you. Councillor Peatfield.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Under CP 42, I would like to propose that we formally create the positions of climate champions and invite a representative from each of the parties to become a climate champion officially. This actually happened unofficially for the last year and has worked extremely successfully in a cross-party manner where 3 of the 4 parties have had champions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Normally, I would invite you to justify, as I did just now, why that is a matter of such urgency. Even I would not dispute that the climate change is a matter of urgency. Therefore, I do believe it can be brought before this meeting. Can I then take nominations?
And a vote to create
Yeah, a vote to create the post to start with. Please, can I have a seconder to do that? Councillor Bagashenka.
You want to take any representation?
Yes, I will in a moment. That is moved and seconded. Which means the mover can speak on the justification of the post. I think you just have actually. Do you want to add anything on that?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Shanker, as seconder, do you want to speak now? I'll reserve your right.
I don't think there's anything to add to what Councillor Peatfield's already said.
Thank you. Are there other speakers? Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First point is that we are all climate champions in this council, both all elected members, officers, staff, everybody must and does put climate change at the forefront of everything they do. But also, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to point out that we have a climate change working partnership as well, which is cross-party, led by an external independent chair. And I would hate for that particular role that's just been assumingly created to conflict with that. I would urge that whoever from the Labour group is adopted, and we've had the nomination, would slot into that role as a matter of course, because this is a very important issue and we must deal with it, and we are dealing with it. However, it needs to be focused, and so I would say that I would urge that person to be part of the climate change working partnership as the Labour nomination, if that's what's going to happen. Thank you.
Can I just get this clear? Was the proposal to have one champion or one from each political group?
The proposal was one champion from each of the political groups, Mr. Mayor.
And a fine point, would you want to include the independents for this purposes as a group?
That's not including the independents as a group. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I think that's a clear proposal that there's a nomination then from each political group. So can I take them in order of size? A nomination. All right, let's vote on the proposal because I think that's got a consensus. Those in favour of the motion, unless you want to come back further, do you on that? Okay. On the proposal to have a climate change champion from each of the political groups, those in favour, please show. That is carried. Does anyone want to register a vote against? Thank you. Right. So now I'm going to invite each group to make a nomination as champion. In terms of size, the Conservative group, would somebody like to nominate?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Potter.
And the Labour group?
Councillor Peatfield.
Thank you. The Lib Dem group?
Councillor Lucy Kerr.
Thank you. And Reform Derby?
Mr. Mayor, this has been sprung upon us quite suddenly. Can we have time to think about this and come back?
We can leave it as a vacancy to come back to.
Thank you.
Yes, certainly. Can I take a vote on that proposal then of those 4 nominees, unless there's any others people want to go? There's a majority in favour. Anybody against that? Sorry, that was not on the agenda, but I did accept that that was urgent business. Okay. So yes, let's go back to the substantive motion, as it were, for the champions.
Let the constitutional appointments here.
Well, the whole, you're right, yeah, the whole thing. The constitutional appointments as amended. Do I have a proposer? Well, I'll move it. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Nater as a seconder. Thank you. Those in favour? Thank you. Anybody against? That is carried. Okay, where does that get us? Item 15 is the neighbourhood chairs. You have a list of proposals. I understand that there is one ward where there is more than one candidate, that being Derwent Ward. Have we received nominations or
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Yes, we've received nominations for all of the wards. The only unresolved issue is the neighbourhood board chair being proposed for Derwent, where Councillor Testro and Councillor Tracy Pearce have both been proposed.
Okay. Those in favour of Councillor Testro, please show. Okay. Those in favour of Councillor Tracy Pearce, please show. Councillor Testro, you are neighbourhood board chairman for Derbyshire. Otherwise, as printed. Yeah. Can we therefore move that for your approval, the substantive document as amended with Councillor Testro in that point? Those in favour, please. Those against? Thank you. Yeah. We now move to outside bodies and charities. I would say that this is quite a long meeting. It's not quite as long as it was last year, but I'm in favour of comfort breaks if people want them. At least 3 members, including myself, are on medication that means that we need comfort breaks from time to time. So don't be surprised in the next year if that happens. You as members can get up at any time, but people on this side of the bench, it's slightly more difficult, and that includes the officers. So if anybody wants to propose a comfort break at any point, please do so. That said.
Councillor Ingle's indicating.
Councillor Ingle, do you want to?
I'm just going to suggest that you possibly want somebody to call one. So can we have a comfort break?
I really don't want one at the moment. But
let me know when you do, Robin, and I'll ask for one.
I think we're doing so well. Done 15, haven't we?
Yeah.
16. So again, I'm going to ask Alex to do his wonderful act and go through this document on outside bodies and charities where there are any contested posts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll briefly run through the remaining vacancies if anyone does wish to put forward a nomination. There is a vacancy on the Compact Forum. They've asked for 3 appointments. We currently have 2 nominations, Councillor Williams and Councillor Lonsdale. Are there any further nominations, please?
In which case, those in favour of Councillor Williams?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. There are three positions and we've only received 2 nominations, so we don't need to take a vote.
So we don't need to vote. All right, thank you, Val. To be honest, I don't even know what Compact does, so there we go.
The next vacancy, 2 appointments have been requested by the Derby Community Healthcare Project. We have a nomination from Councillor Webb, but there is also a further vacancy. So are there any further nominations, please? No. Okay, thank you very much. The next area where a vacancy has arisen is the Derby and Derbyshire War Memorials Committee. They have requested 3 appointments. We've received nominations from Councillors Cooper and Carr. Are there any further nominations, please? Councillor Hassel.
Councillor Hassel. Councillor Jennings.
Councillor Jennings. Any further nominations to that position? Councillor Dinser. Okay, we will have to come back to that one and hold a vote. So bear with me one second. So Councillors Cooper, Carr, Jennings and Dinser.
Do we do that now?
We can move straight to the vote if you prefer, Mr. Mayor.
So the candidates are Councillor Jennings and Councillor Dinser, is that correct?
No, there are now four candidates to 3 appointments. So we will have to go through the process we followed with the similar to the licensing vice chairs.
If that's what's been agreed by party leaders, fine. And I'll ask you to conduct that then, Alex.
Okay, bear with me one moment, please. It will just take a few moments to prepare the spreadsheet. Okay, councillors, when I read your name, please can you indicate which of the 3 of the 4 candidates you would like to propose? Councillor Atwell, please.
Councillor Carr and Councillor Dinser, please.
Councillor Barker.
Councillor Cooper, Councillor Carr and Councillor Jennings, please.
Councillor Bettany, please.
Councillor Cooper, Councillor Carr, Councillor Dinser.
Councillor Bonser, please. Councillor Kerr.
Councillors Carr and Dinser.
Councillor Carr, please.
Councillor Carr and Councillor Dinser.
Councillor Cooper, please.
Councillor Cooper, Councillor Jennings.
Thank you. Councillor Dinser, please.
Councillor Carr, Councillor Dinser.
Thank you. Councillor Evans, please.
Councillors Cooper, Carr and Dinser.
Thank you. Councillor Eyre, please.
Councillor Cooper, Councillor Jennings.
Councillor Froggatt, please.
Councillor Dinser.
Councillor AJ Graves, please.
I'm staying out of this one.
Councillor AW Graves, please.
Cooper, Carr and Dinser.
Councillor Grimmerdale, please.
Councillor Cooper, Councillor Jennings.
Councillor Hassel, please. Councillor Heselgrave, please.
Councillors Carr and Dinser.
Councillor Alison Holmes. Councillor Matthew Holmes. Councillor Hussain.
Councillor Dinser,
Councillor Ingle, please.
Councillor Dinser, Cooper and Carr.
Councillor Jennings, please. Sorry, could you repeat that, please? Thank you. Councillor Jangir Khan, please. Councillor Shiraz Khan. Councillor Kuss.
Councillors Cooper and Carr.
Councillor Lind, please.
Councillor Carr, Councillor Dinser.
Councillor Lonsdale, please.
Councillor Carr, Councillor Dinser.
Councillor Martin, please.
Councillors Dinser and Carr.
Councillor McChrystal, please.
Councillor Carr, sorry, Councillor Cooper and Councillor Jennings.
Councillor Nater, please.
Councillor Carr,
Councillor Nawaz, please.
Carr and Dinser.
Councillor Pandy, please. Councillor Patterson, please. Councillor J. Pearce. Councillor T. Pearce. Councillor Pete Field.
Councillors Carr and Dinser.
Councillor Pegg, please. Councillor Potter, please.
Councillors Cooper and Councillor Jennings, please.
Councillor Poulter.
Councillor Cooper and Jennings. Can I just check, is there an SRA with us?
Councillor Prosser, please.
Councillor Carr.
Sorry, Councillor Prosser, please.
Councillor Carr.
Councillor Repton.
Carr and Dinser.
Councillor Ralston. Councillor Sandu, please.
Councillor Carr and Councillor Dinser.
Councillor Shanker.
Councillor Carr and Dinser.
Councillor Skelton.
Councillors Carr and Dinser.
Councillor Smale, please.
Councillors Cooper, Councillor Jennings.
Councillor Testro, please.
Abstain.
Councillor Webb, please.
Councillor Cooper and Councillor Jennings.
Councillor West, please. Councillor Williams, please.
Councillors Cooper and Jennings, please.
Councillor Willoughby, please.
Councillors Carr and Dinser, please.
And the Mayor, Councillor Wood, please.
Cooper, Carr and Jennings.
I will hand over to Emily to announce the 3 successful candidates.
Just bear with us one moment while we make the spreadsheet work. I didn't know I had to put a 1, not an X in the box. Apologies. I've wrecked the auto sum.
And we put you
I'm
in
a
charge of elections.
I'm a letters person more than a numbers person.
I think that's a jolly good idea. Shall we?
5-minute adjournment.
Yeah, 5 minutes adjournment. Thank you. committee, that hotbed of political intrigue, is that you have appointed councillors Cooper, Dinser and Carr to it. So that's an interesting result by anybody's imagination. Right. Where do we go from there?
Mr. Mayor, I'll take over again from here. I believe the next position we have a vacancy for is for the Derby and Sandy Acre Canal Trust. There are 2 appointments requested. We've received 1 nomination so far, that nomination being Councillor Poulter. Are there any further nominations to that vacancy? No? Okay, we'll move on. The next position, I believe originally we had a contested position for Derbyshire Sport between Councillor Nater and Councillor Nawaz. I'm now informed that Councillor Nater has withdrawn, so we'll move straight on. The next outside body to which there is a vacancy, World Heritage UK. 2 appointments have been requested. They need not be elected members. 1 nomination has been received, that being Councillor Wood. Would anyone like to make a nomination to that other vacancy? No?
Mr.
Okay.
Mayor,
Councillor Ralston.
Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to ask if either of the youth mayors are interested in that role, because it would be interesting for them to go on if they should wish to.
Yes, but perhaps rather than nominating at this point, that could be taken up by the officers to investigate, so that they know exactly what the implications are, rather than throw anybody into it at this point. If that's acceptable to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We'll make some investigations on that front. The next position, we have a contested position on the Quad Management Board. 1 appointment is required. We've received 2 nominations, those nominations being Councillor Prosser and Councillor West. So if you'd like to conduct a vote, please, Mr. Mayor.
Those in favour of Councillor Prosser?
Could you raise your hands high, please, so I can see them? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 28. One Conservative group and then 7.
And Councillor West. Councillor Prosser, we're on the Quad Management Committee Board.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 2 final vacancies on the outside bodies. We have a vacancy on the Museum of the Mercian Regiment. They've requested 1 appointment. We've had no nominations so far.
Councillor Hassel.
Any further nominations, please, councillors? No? Okay.
Councillor Jennings is therefore on the Mercian Regiment Board. Okay. And there's another one?
Yeah, just bear with me 1 second. The final vacancy is to Sagoma. There is currently a vacancy. They would ordinarily request a cabinet member.
Mr. Mayor, I have been attending this past year on that, and I'm happy to continue doing so if so wish.
Thank you, Councillor Ralston. If you bear with me 1 moment, please, Mr. Mayor. There are no further vacancies or any issues to be resolved in terms of the appointments to charities. So you may now move the substantive document.
Councillors have before them the approval of attendances at annual conferences, which I move. Is there a seconder? Councillor Barker, thank you. All those in favour? Anybody against? That is carried. Thank you. Where's that? Right. Item 18 is constitutional amendments, which is new legislation enforced by trading standards. We have a report on the agenda asking Council to consider amendments to the scheme of delegations within the Council Constitution that will allow officers in the Council's trading standards team to discharge powers granted to local authorities under new legislation. Councillor Barker, as the Cabinet Member with responsibility for governance, would you move the recommendations in the report, please?
Moved as printed, Mr. Mayor.
Is there a seconder? And a hoist? Thank you, Councillor Jennings. Councillor Jennings seconded. Those in favour, please show. Anybody against? That is carried. Thank you. We're getting to the interesting bit yet. Oh, yeah. Okay. We now move to two notices of motion received prior to the meeting and circulated with your agenda documents. The first one is on biodiversity in Derby, to be moved by Councillor Kerr, seconded by Councillor Nater. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's been a lot of talk over many decades about the change of the number of other species and the numbers of other species that we are sharing on this planet. And I think there's a growing awareness that we need to be not just noting what is happening, but changing our behaviour. In the 1960s and 70s, I'm sure I wasn't the only person who sometimes had the job of cleaning a car. And in those days, I remember trying to get stuck-on insects off the front of the car. Now, things have changed. When I clean our car, on the rare occasions I do, there is very rarely any squidged-on insects on the front of the car. Now, it's either because we've got some really good paint technology and they don't stick, or else the aerodynamics are different, or there just aren't as many insects in our environment. And the indications are that it's probably the latter. It's that last, that we haven't got as many insects as we used to do. And that means that part of our food chain is not happening as it used to. That the food for birds and bats is not there. That we haven't got as many pollinators to make sure that the food that we want to eat is actually being created. And if we just sit back and say, well, actually we don't like the wasps and we don't like the gnats and we don't like these and we don't like that, it's not the biodiversity that will suffer, it is everybody, because we are part of that biodiversity and we need to be respectful of that network that we are part of. And that's why I brought this here. There is some work started, low-key work started, to put together a biodiversity plan for the City Council, but it needs to be beyond the City Council, just as we've talked on climate change, that it needs to be not just the council dealing with it, but the whole of the city. There is lots of the city that isn't under our control. And we need to be looking at how that is managed and not just how we manage our parks, our streets and our other bits of estate. So this is looking at recognising that there are two elements here that are particularly important. The insects, which we don't think much of, but are absolutely critical, do get affected by the pollutants, the pesticides that are being put down, very often for vegetation, that we like to have our nice tidy streets, but the poisons that we're putting down to kill our plants are also killing those insects. And there was a report people might have seen the last fortnight ago, which was saying that those pesticides, those herbicides, and very often it's glyphosate, 70% of the herbicide used is glyphosate, which we use on our city streets and parks. And that is destroying some of the microorganisms that are keeping our soils healthy. So we need to change. Change isn't always comfortable, and it will take time, and that's why we actually need to plan this. It isn't something that we can easily do overnight because there will be repercussions, and we do need to think about what technologies we will use instead of putting poison on places where our children are playing, our pets are exploring. But we need to start, and the sooner we start, the sooner we'll get to the end. So my hope is that we can start that process. We've got a biodiversity plan in preparation. We need to work out now, start the process of how we're going to deliver that change, get rid of the pesticides. Other local authorities have been working at those plans and saying it takes around 2 to 3 years to work out how they're going to manage things differently. I would like us to be able to do it in that 2 to 3 years. And we need to take with us the city. So that's the pesticides. And in terms of lighting, I was quite conscious. I was reading some extra pages last night about the impact of light on insects. Now, it's very common, you know, if this was nighttime, you might well, the windows open, we might well have some moths sticking to the lights on the ceiling. There used to be a lot more of them sticking to the lights on the ceiling than stick there now because, again, moths are down in number. And one of the reasons is they're spending their energy trying to get at a light source. And they're not feeding, and therefore they're getting weaker. So I'm conscious that if I don't draw my curtains at this time of year, my house is attracting like moths and other insects to the outside of it, to their detriment, and actually to my detriment because it's still quite cold outside. So we need to change our ways. The council needs to lead on making sure that other organisations are changing their ways on lighting as well. And those are two things that we need to be thinking about now. There is work still happening in terms of strategic planning. So making sure that as we go into our next set of consultations, we have included stronger policy on light will be good for that biodiversity. We don't need to wait until the full biodiversity plan is written and approved before we can start to take action. And these are two areas in terms of pesticides and light where I think we should be taking action sooner rather than later. Sorry, that was a little bit rambling, but the gist of it is there in the motion I put forward. I was going to ask a question about looking at why it's referred to as looking at the wider environmental rather than the more other pesticides. Why not all pesticides? Because there are times when pesticides are actually quite useful for keeping down rats, for example, or dealing with black mold in houses. And to say that we still should be able to do things that are close to us is one thing, but if it's out in the wider environment, then that is definitely not so good. So I hope that everybody will support this as the first step on what I hope will be a much more comprehensive path in maybe 6 months, a year's time, when we have our full plan written and prepared. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nater, do you wish to speak now? I'll reserve your right.
I'll reserve my right, Mr. Mayor.
Any other members of the council wish to contribute to the debate? Councillor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I would like to propose an amendment to this motion, if at all first, please, and if that could be circulated. Can you show it on the screens? Okay. I think, Councillor Kerr, I think you've kind of answered the question myself that we were putting in. The motion I'm asking is to put in a clause where it says where practicable. And the reason being is that us as a local authority, as a council, we're not ready to stop right now immediately to stop using weed suppression or glyphosate. And in particularly on our highways. As you know, we've got a lot of weeds that do grow on our curbstones on our highways. And if we were to stop that immediately, we would not be in a healthy situation with our road network. Now, obviously, we're trying to improve our road network with our £9 million capital income on that. But what I would like to propose to council is to give us time to look at the alternatives so that we don't rush ourselves into a decision where it's going to cost us more than it does saving. I don't think the motion that's been put forward by Councillor Kerr is not a noble one. I think it's one thing that we should all be looking at. And after speaking to our grounds maintenance manager this morning and going over extensive campaigns over it, as you know, that we've supported the No May campaign this season. I took part in that, although I think the weather did the majority of that for me. But yes, I believe that we should be looking towards a sustainable solution for biodiversity. So what I am proposing is halfway for now to try and bring this together with our grounds maintenance team, with councillors yourself. I mean, there'll be areas in your own wards that you would think that would be best suited not to have pesticides. So some ideas, and I think Councillor Kay, you touched on it, around playgrounds, some around where we do school maintenance, bases of trees. I think that's one that I think we could possibly, certainly concede straight away, because I think we have seen the colour of the grass around bases of trees and it doesn't look very attractive. There's also street furniture that's plotted on grass verges. I think that is also another area where we can, stop using the pesticide, glyphosate immediately. Of course, we have our parks, we have our cemetery and crematorium. So, Mr. Mayor, in the gist of it, I'm asking if we could just slow it down for a bit on the glyphosate whilst we look at the alternative options, but we certainly do need this to maintain our highway network. Otherwise, weed control on our highway network will either become severely expensive or it will start damaging our infrastructure on our highway network. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Is that amendment seconded? Thank you. Lots of seconders, thank you. Can I refer back to the mover of the substantive motion to ask you whether you would consider taking that amendment and accepting it rather than debating it, or would you rather we debate it now?
Mr. Mayor, I prefer we would debate it now, because this is an area that is being explored by other councils already, and intentionally there is not a deadline included in the substantive motion because of the need to change. But there are new technologies available, dealing often with heat or with steam, with hot water, with foam systems, which some councils are actually finding is cheaper than using the glyphosate. So I don't think we need to be frightened of cost. The costs can actually come down with change.
Thank you. My question really was, do we need to debate the amendment, the addition of where practicable? What your request is that we do. Councillor Nater, you were the seconder of the substantive motion. Do you wish to speak on the amendment?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I think what Councillor Smale is mentioning is quite right as well. But I think in my notes I can perhaps clear up a bit of this. So pesticides, including weed killers and high carbon footprint, working against the aim to make Derby a carbon neutral city. Pesticides, including weed killers, are toxic to plants, animals, to humans. They damage soils and pollute watercourses, reducing biodiversity, harming the ability of our planet to support us. The most commonly used weed killer, glyphosate, has been declared probable synergism by World Health Organization. The GMB Union supports a ban on glyphosate to protect its members and general public, and the EU recommends that glyphosate use should be minimized in public spaces such as parks, public playgrounds and gardens. In 2020, after more than one successful lawsuit, the main manufacturer of glyphosate agreed a $2 billion compensation deal over cancers probably caused by weed killer in the US. There are additional classes actions going on in other countries, including Australia and Canada, given the health risks to residents and employees and the financial risk to council. Continuing to use glyphosate in Derby appears nothing short of, well, we need to look at reducing it, as Councillor Smale says. We propose that Derby City Council should commit to ending the use of pesticides, including weed killers, by the end of December 2023. I think that would be sufficient time. This should be achieved by the following practical advice provided by Pesticide Action Network, an example of other councils, including Brighton and Hove, Bristol, Cambridge, Hackney and Lewes. Immediately ending all spray of unnecessary areas such as fence lines around tree trunks and all spaces in parks and schools. altering civic planting schemes to eliminate the need of chemical weed suppression, e.g. changing borders from annual bedding to perennials and meadow areas, stimulates to improving those areas from wildlife, making them more attractive according to modern times. Educating residents, business users and visitors so they understand the journey the city is taking to become more healthy, wildlife and friendly. Regrouting junctions where people weed growth can occur, switching use of mechanical mesh or heat treatments in necessary spaces such as road guttering and site species. This will also work to reduce river pollution from weed killer runoff. In addition, Derby City Council should work with stakeholders, including residents, businesses, housing developers, and other land managers in and around the city to achieve the goal of pesticide-free city. While some of these measures have cost implications other than cost neutral or even cost saving, meaning the overall scheme should be able to be made cost neutral over the first 5 years and will save money into the future. In conclusion, ending pesticide use will benefit everyone in Derby City and help the council achieve its climate goals. Enacting this motion will now demonstrate that Derby is serious about the commitments to the environment, serious about protecting people who live in the city, and serious about making future for us all. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers on the amendment? Councillor Graves Senior.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't actually going to speak on this, Councillor Kerr, but the more I read it, the more I'm a bit concerned about it. I have to say, right at the very beginning, I understand and appreciate the sentiments of the motion. I think it's a very ideal thing to work towards. Wouldn't it be great if we were all biodiverse community around the world? Mr. Mayor, we live in a city. Okay, we have citizens who live in the city. There's a lot of people. It's very, very difficult to be biodiverse in the way that Councillor Kerr wants us to be. However, I do think that I understand the arguments about weed killer, and maybe the council could look at whether it's the right weed killer that we use. Maybe we could use a better version of it. I don't know. Surely that sort of debate would have been better going to an overview and scrutiny meeting to say, let's look at this, let's see what we can do, let's help the council make better decisions, rather than bringing a motion to this council to make everything change and then makes it very difficult for the council in the long run. One of the things I am concerned about is one part of it is about lighting. Are we talking about putting the city in darkness? Because if we are, then we're going to get residents who are feeling that their security is undermined, and they're going to feel worried about it. And this is why it's those sort of issues why this should have gone to an overview and scrutiny, so we could tease out all the problems. I find that this motion is a very fluffy motion because it just looks at let's be fluffy about it and let's do this and the world will go right. If we had Councillor Kerr's way, every street would be cycles only. We know that, but it's not practical, it's not reasonable, and most people wouldn't want it. So I do have sentiment for this. I do appreciate it. And what I would like to do, I would like us to encourage our residents to engage in biodiversity. My garden, for instance, is one such. My garden doesn't have any pesticides on it, and it encourages wildlife. It encourages all the creepy crawlies that people want. It encourages the birds. That's great. Let's encourage our residents to turn their gardens into that bit, rather than try and make our streets look untidy with weeds growing out of it. Because people won't want that. They really won't want that. We'll get more complaints than ever. So I just think we ought to be careful about this. Whilst it's a nice fluffy motion, we do really need to think about whether it's the right thing for this council at this time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I would remind members that we are discussing the amendment to add the words where practical. Anybody else? That's no criticism of any member. Does anybody else wish to speak on the amendment? In which case we'll put the amendment to the vote. Those in favour of the amendment, which you have seen. Thank you. Those got. Those against the amendment? It's carried. Yeah. The amendment is carried and therefore becomes part of the substantive motion. Anybody wish to speak on the substantive motion as amended? In which case, Councillor Nater, you did reserve your right, although I imagine you said as much as you wanted to on the amendment. Do you wish to speak again?
Sorry, the noted, and I think we can look at it, you know, the amendments sort of carried, it's voted on, so we'll by it.
In which case, I'll refer to Councillor Kerr to sum up.
Thank you for those who've spoken, mostly in support of what the aim is, and the need for giving a bit of time for this change is to ensure that we have streets that don't look scruffy in a way people don't want, because there are different technologies. Weed killers only came in strongly in the 1950s. We're only talking about something that's been bad for the last 60 years, my whole of my life. So we need to go forward. We need to go into the future, and I'm hopeful that this is something that the council is going to be now leading on, and supportive of our officers being able to help us create a city that is safer for its population, including that biodiversity of a population in all those gardens and streets, and not just for people. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Can we take a vote then? Those in favour of the substantive motion as amended, please show. I think that is well and truly carried. Anybody against? Thank you. That's unusual. It's unanimous. Unusual today, anyway. Thank you. Which brings us to the last notice of motion to be moved by Councillor Kerr and seconded by Councillor Carr, investing in Derby's electricity network. Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, sorry, me again. If somebody else had put a motion in, we might have had some switching around. Electricity, we all use it. We're lit by it today. Our recording is being done because of it. But we're being heated almost certainly from gas. We also use coal for some places in the city still, surprisingly, and many of our cars will still be fueled by petrol and diesel. But we know that in the next few years, that's got to change. We've got to reduce that dependence on gas and oil and diesel, because there won't be enough biogas, gas from sustainable sources, at that time. We know that the amount of electricity that we're going to use is almost certainly going to go up, even as we change from standard lighting into LEDs and have energy saving in other ways. So our electricity network is going to be having to change. Western Power Distribution, who look after our network in Derby and beyond, is currently got a consultation about what changes are going to be needed. I'm not an expert in knowing what changes will be needed, but we have a vision as a council that our city is going to become a zero carbon city, and that will mean that there is a lot more electricity which will be used here, and we can hope that much of that will be generated within the city. We've already got places with solar panels on roofs, including the council house. We've got our turbine in the river. We've got a couple of wind turbines out at Spondon. But a lot of our electricity use does come from outside the city, and that will continue. And that's the way our city is actually set up at the moment, to be able to bring in power from outside, and then we use it. So either there's going to be a lot more power having to come in from outside, and we're going to need to strengthen those networks, bringing power in from wind farms or solar farms somewhere outside the city, or we're going to need to look at the way in which we get more electricity within the city, with more roofs, with solar panels on them, and storage, because when the sun goes down, our solar panels will no longer work. It's obvious, but we have to think about what we're going to be doing differently, how we're going to manage that. And As one of our major infrastructure providers, Western Power Distribution need to work with us as the city on that. So we may already be gathering a relationship with them because we have talked, the council is talking about its integrated infrastructure strategy. But having spoken to Western Power this week, they don't feel that they're necessarily a key developer within that yet. And they have got their consultation going on at the moment. So they have opened their door to us to contact them. So let's use this opportunity. They have their next 3-year budget starting in less than a year's time. And we want to make sure that in that budget, they are investing in the ways, in Derby, in the ways that Derby will need for the future. So I very much hope that we will make sure, leading from the front here as Derby City Council, as full council, to say, let's make sure we're building those relationships, that we are talking with them about the needs of Derby and the way we can be working with them to create the zero carbon city that we have agreed that we are trying to achieve. So please support this. It's asking for communications, for officer time, and for us to be part of guiding Derby's future energy supplies. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Carr, do you want to speak now or reserve your right?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I think I'll speak now, thank you.
Thank you, please do.
Well, some of the things that Councillor Kerr has mentioned are already starting to happen. I know, for instance, that we are going to be banning the sale of new gas boilers sometime within the next 7 or 8 years. She mentioned power flows. It's an interesting question. I've just decided to exchange my car for a new electric car. The salespeople tell me that the sales of electric cars are going up dramatically. Now, they'll all be plugged into the system. If you've got a smart meter, the system will be able to, at the time the sun goes down, people are coming home, plugging their cars in, you've got a massive battery capacity. Councillor Kerr mentioned storage, so that will also be something that we need to look at. And I think Western Power will be the people that can help us monitor those power flows in order that we can reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got an amendment, if Alex could present that to Council. Thank you. Thank you. Can I continue? Please. Okay. It's very simple. The Conservative group don't have a problem with supporting this motion, but I would just like to have a minor addition, but a very important one, to paragraph 3, and it's just purely to refer this to the Climate Change Working Partnership. A few reasons for that. I think tonight's actually underlined that we've now got formalised community champions from three of the political parties, and I would urge the Reform Party to take it seriously and have somebody around that table, because it's a very important group of councillors, elected councillors, officers, and also, as I've said before, an external independent chair. Whether that be to challenge, whether that to be bring ideas to the table, or whether that to agree in unison with the other parties on various things. Not forgetting we have a capital allocation of significant funding for this working party to deliberate on and potentially allocate or propose allocation of. Why is it important here? I believe that this is an ideal piece of work to move forward via that partnership. I think it's the right place for it to be, and it needs to understand that, in a wider sense, that our city's regeneration ambitions, the supply of electricity and utilities need to keep pace with those ambitions. And as Councillor Kerr has said, those kind of decisions need to be made very carefully so that it's sustainable. For example, smart parks, discussions are ongoing with Western Power, so it may be that the working partnership can dip into that, understand those discussions, and actually that's something that can be keyed into this proposal. So all I'm asking for is a support of a very simple but important amendment which would focus this piece of work where I believe it needs to be within the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that seconded, that amendment? Councillor Potter, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I formally second this amendment and reserve my right. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to do again what I did before and refer to Councillor Kerr to see if she would accept the idea of referring this to the working party as part of her motion, or whether you wish it to be debated.
Despite being one of the climate champions, I'm not sure what the Climate Change Working Partnership is. Does the Cabinet member mean the Climate Change Commission, Community Commission, hub, something within the officer group?
Can you clarify, Councillor Holmes?
Yeah, Councillor Kerr, it's the body that yourself currently and Councillor Potter and Councillor Nadine Peatfield are actually part of, the working partnership, the Climate Change Working Partnership.
Do you wish the amendment to be debated, or will you accept it?
May I ask the another climate champion, Councillor Peatfield, do you recognise this group?
No, you may not. I'm
Sorry,
asking
Mr.
you
Mayor.
whether you wish to accept this, or whether you wish to have it debated.
Mr. Mayor,
I'm taking the line that you will not accept it. Therefore, we'll open it for debate.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, if I may, I'm happy to have partnership change to commission if that's clarification for Councillor Kerr.
If he means the commission, then that's fine. I know what the body is we're talking about, and that will be okay. Thank you.
So you're accepting it as part of your motion,
Reluctantly.
so we do not need to debate it. Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak on the motion as amended? Councillor Evans.
Thank you. I noticed that Councillor Kerr didn't mention once what really the motion states, and that's promoting smart meters. Promoting smart meters. In my electrical training, I was taught never to assume. You can't see electricity, but it's very dangerous. The same applies to radio frequency microwave radiation. I'll just give you a few facts. Smart meters may be able to identify individual electrical devices inside the home and record when they are operated, causing invasion of privacy. Smart meters transmit wireless signals which may be intercepted by unauthorized and unknown parties. Those signals can be used to monitor behavior and occupancy, and they can be used by criminals to aid criminal activity against the occupants. Data about occupants' daily habits and activities are collected, recorded and stored in permanent databases, which are accessed by parties not authorised, maybe, or invited to know and share the private data by those activities. Those who access the smart meter databases can review a permanent history of household activities, complete with calendar, date of time metrics to gain a highly invasive, detailed view of the lives of the occupants. Those databases may be shared or fall into the hands of criminals, blackmailers, corrupt law enforcement, private hackers or wireless transmissions, power company employees and other unidentifiable parties who may act against the interests of the occupants under the meter surveillance. It may be possible with certain analysis of certain smart meter data for unauthorised and distant parties to determine medical conditions, sexual activities, physical locations of persons within the home, vacancy patterns and personal information habits of the occupants. You've got to really think about this. I know the sexual habits one seems a bit strange, but you've got to explore it. You really have. In the wireless smart meter grid, the entire home will become a node of the internet. This means the home device usage will suddenly become available to hackers who can use the data, like we've already spoken about. Smart meters can be disconnected remotely. That's a fact. Now, we've been talking about transferring to renewable energies, but the grid already in the winter months can be operating at 95% of capacity where we are today. We're absolutely nearly at breaking point. So in the near future, we're going to be having power cuts, and they will be automatic power cuts via the smart meters. Are we willing to accept this? It gets worse. It gets worse. Wireless smart meters, when activated, emit intense pulse bursts of non-ionizing radio frequency microwave radiation. more than 5,000 studies have shown that non-ionising microwave radiation, radio frequency electromagnetic fields is harmful to humans, animals and plants. It's demonstrated by Daniel Hirsch, Senior Nuclear Policy Lecturer at UCSC, it's in New York, that on the body, when exposed by these meters, can be between 160 to 800 times as much microwave radiation as a mobile phone. Human and animal cell culture studies indicate long-term systemic health effects from radio frequency microwave radiation, including hormone disruption, DNA damage, leakage of blood-brain barrier, sperm count reduction and damage to sleep disorders, learning difficulties, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorders, dementia and cancer, including leukemia and brain glaucoma. Now, I just want to expand on this one a bit more. In the electrical field where I am, it was always stated that there's never been a proven link between clusters of childhood leukemia and overhead power lines, people living near to transmission lines. Never a proven link, no. But there's a very good correlation there, and you can see it, and that exists today. But no, there isn't a proven link. So that doesn't wash. That does not wash. The government's own website, which was last updated on the 23rd of April 2020, Phase 2, calculation mapping of the radioactive energy absorption in the body due to signals from the smart meter. That's the statement they've used. Now that's clever because they've used energy absorption in the body, which is heat, the heat effect. And we know about the heat effect. It's been studied extensively. No, I'm not talking about the heat effect. I'm talking specifically about the interactions of the body, the resonant frequencies that the body has at a molecular level.
Councillor Evans, thank you for your contribution. You always bring stimulating debate to something rather dull, and you have, I think, united the entire council, regardless of political persuasion. Councillor Kerr, you're right to sum up. Have you anything you wish to add?
I am tempted to say something more about smart meters, but I'm not going to. There's a lot more development and opportunity there. I very much hope that we'll be able to take this forward. I would have liked the council to be feeling that it could lead on here rather than passing it on to a partnership body, but maybe the partnership body will lead to more interactions and action in terms of working with Western Power. And maybe it'll come up in the integrated infrastructure strategy and other things that are happening along those lines as well. But many thanks to everybody who is going to support the amended motion.
Thank you. So can we move to a vote on the amended motion? Those in favour, please show. Thank you. Yeah. Anybody against? That is carried. And I think that concludes the business today, does it not? Brings the business of today's annual general meeting to a close. I'd like to thank all those that have been watching the proceedings online, and also thank our hosts, Derby County Football Club, and officers who have been involved in the coordinating Derby City Council's first physical public meeting since the pandemic began. I very much look forward to seeing you all at the next meeting in July. I don't know where we'll be, but we will be physical. Thank you very much, and good night.